To no one's surprise, it turns out that racing this car has been a much bigger challenge than I ever anticipated. If you missed our last episode with the 244 GTK at Gingerman Raceway in Michigan, we had a lot of trouble with our turbo system. Some of those challenges we've faced before. The adapter that supports our turbo from the manifold has cracked once again, but on top of that, the bolts that hold the hot side housing of the turbo to the core itself vibrated out and took our turbocharger out on the second day of racing. I was told years ago that this K-Series was going to try to vibrate this car to death, but I had no idea what I was really getting into and what kind of problems it might actually cause. So today, we're going to completely revise the turbo system on this car, and that begins with an all-new turbo manifold. I purchased this one as a stainless steel cast unit from Artec. And my reasoning behind this is that while I know a nice tubular manifold might flow a little bit better, few options out there are specialized for fitting a turbo in the back of this Ferrari, and I know that a cast unit is unlikely to fail in any meaningful way. I don't have to worry about it cracking under load or while supporting the turbo. Things that we've learned can be a challenge from our current setup. Turbo support has been a recurring issue. Now that we've cracked the turbo adapter twice, a number of you have asked why I simply don't brace the turbo to the engine itself instead of something like the chassis, and trust me, that was one of the first ideas we had, but there's just not a good way to do it given that this turbo manifold puts the turbo all the way at the back of the car. But this new Artec manifold is a top-mount configuration, which means not only are we going to move the turbo considerably, we're also going to simplify our system, as we don't need a sump tank or sump pump anymore. We can drain oil directly out of the turbo. In all, the goal here is to just radically simplify what's happening in the engine bay of this car. I want to keep all the components, but I want to put them in a better position, one that's less likely to suffer from vibration or to crack from heat. I want the turbo to be supported from underneath instead of dangling from the manifold itself, trying to pull itself apart. And of course, if we can bring more weight from this car closer to the center instead of dangling over the back, I think that's also a victory as well. But on top of changing the turbo manifold, we also have to replace the turbo. In the last episode, we killed it because it came apart. And so that means we're putting a brand new one on. This is yet another TurboSmart TS2 6262. It's identical to the one that we ran before, and in an ideal world, we're going to make sure that this one doesn't separate the housings from the core. The hope is that if we stay on top of torque checking all these bolts, we won't have the issue. So one of the things we're adding to our pre-race checklist is to always check the bolts that hold these parts together, as well as more or less everything else we can get access to. Torque checking hardware on this car is going to be one of the most important steps before it goes out on track every single time. Luckily for us, TurboSmart has an incredible warranty, and they're replacing the turbo at no cost to us, just as they would literally any other customer. The only part we're going to retain from the old turbo is the cold side housing, because I've already modified it, and I don't see a really good reason to cut up a new one. With that said, though, we do have to modify this one even further, because we've got to change the direction of the outlet. In all, we're kind of limited on options and space. There's room for the turbo to sit here, but because we're reconfiguring everything, we've got to modify the chassis itself and apply some very tight bends to get the air from the turbo back into the intercooler. It's not as straight of a shot as it used to be. I'm wanting to retain the HD clamps from Vibrant, as I prefer them to a silicone coupler, but it does require a lot of work on alignment. So we're getting all of the parts tacked together to make sure it's all going to work, as I don't want a boost leak once we get over to the dyno. So right now I got to figure out how to get the exhaust routed from the turbo out of the back of the car. It's close to the head, but I know that we've got enough room. I'm using kind of the end piece of our previous exhaust, and I kind of want to reuse what's here because it's already got all the O2 sensor bungs in it. There's 3 of them, and I don't like drilling stainless. I don't want to like do all that stuff over again if I don't have to. If I can just attach pipe to the end of this and get it out the back of the car, that'd be nice, but I think it's going to be a little bit too close, unfortunately. I'm waiting on Summit to get here at the moment so that I have 3.5-inch material, and I'm waiting on Summit so that I have a new TurboSmart wastegate flange, or FedEx, not Summit. But otherwise, all I can fab up right now is just this cross tube we were tinkering with, so I guess let's knock that out, get that squared away, and I need to weld up the cold side housing and cross that off the list. Then it should just be kind of some plumbing and head over to Andrews and get this thing tuned one more time. Now, the downside at the moment is I don't have my tubing mender. I let somebody borrow it and they're out of town, so I'm kind of up shit's creek. So this is going to be the most quick and dirty thing I've ever put on this car. I am going to kind of go against what I would like to do. This is a piece of cut up A-pillar from the F40. I'm going to cut bends out of the reject tubes that are sitting under the workbench and just weld them together. And it's not going to be pretty, but it will absolutely work and be plenty strong enough. And I can re-engineer this after the season. We can come back and kind of solve this. But for now, I just want to get something put together so that it's done. Because at the moment, what time is it? Yeah, we have basically 3 days from this point forward, 72 hours, something like that, from right now to be at the dyno, which is plenty of time, but not if I sit here and spend too much time trying to make pretty solutions to problems that don't need it. It's times like this that I have to remind myself not to let perfection become the enemy of good enough. I don't need the nicest support in the world for the intercooler. I just need one that's going to work. In fact, I think that's probably a mindset I need to embrace as I make all of the parts we're going to need over the next few days. This is a functional race car, not a show car, so there's nothing wrong with reusing pieces of the old exhaust, or even the previous exhaust system from our previous big turbo setup. Why make more work for myself when I can just put some stuff together and build a bridge between them? The exhaust we made for the old G42 we originally had on the car routes underneath part of the subframe and out the back of the car quite nicely, and so if I pair that with the first bend that comes out of the turbo rather well, and we put a flex pipe between them, I think we're going to be in business and I can save some time for other parts of this project. They're going to be a little bit more intense. On the note of flex pipes, some of you guys have asked why we didn't just incorporate a flex pipe into the previous turbo setup to reduce vibration and allow the engine to move, but there wasn't room to introduce one anywhere within the system. This time around, I'm just hopeful it's going to help keep us from cracking the exhaust, given that it does have to go a long way, and I want the engine to be able to move without the exhaust's far end swinging up and down wildly as that happens. Because of the change in turbo and wastegate position, I'm going to nix the dual exhaust design that we had before, where the exhaust and the wastegate dump pipe were equal in size. This time around, I'm going for something that's a little bit more rally car inspired, with a 3.5-inch exhaust for the turbo and a 2-inch for the wastegate. It's different, but I think it looks pretty good, and it definitely says there's a 4-banger in here, so we're going to move on to the next project, and that's figuring out that top tube to cross over the turbo and support the intercooler. As mentioned, I'm kind of scabbing this one together using separate bends from reject tubes on the F40, but honestly, I can't come up with a really good reason not to other than it kind of makes my skin crawl. Normally, that'd be reason enough, but in this case, we are in a time crunch, and we've got to get this car out to Wisconsin for the next round of grid life. So, instead of wasting time worrying about small details, I want this thing done, up, and running. For better or worse, I saved the one thing I wanted to do least until the very end, and that's adding bungs for our EGT sensors to the bottom side of the exhaust manifold. This requires drilling holes through cast stainless steel that is anything but thin, and while this is probably easily doable with the right equipment, I just never seem to have it. The ports also need to be equidistant from the cylinder head, so placement is rather critical if we want them to work correctly. And there's a bit of planning ahead required because all of the sensors need to clear each other and the cylinder head itself. For those not in the know, EGT sensors allow us to monitor the health of each individual cylinder. The temperature of the exhaust gas can tell us things like how much fuel we're burning or how efficient the engine is being, and that can be a precursor to a lot of potential problems. With most of the system wrapped up, there are a few other small changes that I knew we needed to tackle before the car goes back to the track, and one of those is reinforcing the lower engine mount. I realized that it was flexing under load, which is part of the reason the engine was moving as much as it was in the past. I got it all welded up, we can cross that one off the list. Another step is reconfiguring the oil drain for the turbo. Instead of running that sump tank and pumping all of the oil back into our dry sump tank, we're now just going to route the oil directly out of the bottom of the turbo and back into the timing cover of the engine, which is a pretty standard installation. On the other hand, there's going to be a lot more heat in the engine bay because everything is packaged in a much more condensed way. So a lot of our hosing, such as the oil drain line itself, is going to get a heat wrap on it to make sure we don't melt it and start a fire. With the oil system finished up, we can now remove the old pump and sump tank, which saves us a decent bit of weight. Is it actually consequential? No, not with my talent behind the wheel, but I'm happy to get rid of it and simplify things as much as possible. From here, it was supposed to be on to final assembly. Get all of the bolts tightened down and make sure this thing is ready to head to the dyno because we do need to tune it now that we've changed all these parts. All the things like hoses and fittings need to be tightened up and everything needs to be plugged in. However, I did find another major glaring issue after I went to go install the wheels and tires. It turns out that lurking behind the driver's side wheel, the transmission mount had completely cracked and separated. There's no telling how long it's actually been like this, but this would explain all of the driveline movement that we had at the last event. One bolt was loose, and the bottom of the other mount had completely blown out. It was slack, giving the transmission the opportunity to move up and down about 1/4 of an inch. Repairing this wasn't going to be an easy task and requires pulling the transmission mount out of the car. And initially, I thought that was going to be a monumental task that would require disassembly of pretty much everything. However, luck was on my side, and I was able to get some replacement material wedged into place and tacked in position while inside the car. And then the mount itself, I did manage to wiggle out with just millimeters to spare. What I expected to be an all-night fix was done in a couple of hours, and with that, we were ready to head to the dyno. Once again, we are back at Animal Auto with Andrew Molina, who will be doing the tuning on the car. We're not really aiming for more power, and we haven't changed the turbo itself, but given the massively different flow characteristics and the likely change of overall boost creep, it's important that we put the car on the dyno and make sure that everything's going to cooperate. We've changed enough parts of this system that it could behave differently, and I don't want to blow this thing up because we were negligent. As pretty much every dyno day of mine tends to go, we were off to a rough start. Things just weren't spooling the way that they should. In contrast to how it operated before, the turbo wasn't kicking on until about 6,700 RPM, and we were down nearly 150 horsepower at the peak. We had hoped it was going to be something obvious like a boost leak, or maybe something set up incorrectly when it comes to the wastegate, but we couldn't find anything conclusive. Something just wasn't right. The car wasn't making anywhere close to the power that it's supposed to. With the power band now 2,000 RPM shorter than it should be, we were left scratching our heads. Was this just a result of the new manifold not flowing as well as my previous straightforward design? That didn't seem like it made a ton of sense, but it's really all we could conjure up in the moment. Keep in mind, literally nothing else other than charge piping and the exhaust had changed. Neither of those yielded a big enough difference to contribute to such a difference in power, and we even tried removing the air filter to make sure we weren't just choking the engine, but nothing gave us the results that we needed. After spending all day trying to diagnose the issue, we threw in the towel knowing that at this moment the car was simply unfit to head to Wisconsin. We had major issues and only 12 hours or so before the Falcon Big Rig was going to leave town. The assumption was that I'd have to go back to the drawing board and redesign part of our turbo system to figure out why everything was choked. So I loaded the car up and went back to the shop. In this moment, it seemed like a sure thing. We were going to miss grid life at Road America. All right, mic cam. I'm recording on the phone today because I don't have Anthony with me because it's Sunday. I am currently on my way back over to Animal Auto at the dyno because yesterday we discussed whether or not there was a possibility that the engine had jumped timing. And so I pulled the valve cover, looked at the timing marks, and they were slightly off. Some friends were saying, no, that looks normal. Others were saying, nah, it ain't right. It was like half a tooth off. I don't know how, but it was. So Andrew came over, we retimed the engine, and it does seem to be happier, which means, hey, we got to put this thing back on the dyno and see if that's what we were fighting the whole time. I'm hopeful that it is. That'd be like a really simple solution. I won't have to redo the entire turbo system again. Downside is the Falcon Big Rig left Friday. So if this solves it and we get the car working, it sounds like I'm going to be the truck driver and I'm going to have to tow this thing all the way out to Wisconsin next week so that we can make grid life. So fingers crossed that it works because I want to go racing. I don't really want to drive to Wisconsin, but I want to go racing. So here we go. I'll record with the phone. We'll see what we get today. Fingers crossed. And so I made it back to Animal Auto, we got the car mounted to the dyno, and things immediately turned around. It was abundantly clear the issue we were facing was that the engine did jump timing, and that was drastically affecting its overall efficiency. The power curve came back to life, the turbo spooled early, and this thing was back to doing exactly what we needed it to. So the question we all want the answer to is, why did the engine jump timing? How is that possible? Well, we spent a number of hours trying to figure that out, and the best I've got is a hypothesis, but I feel really confident in it. We realized that the rev matching portion of our downshift programming wasn't activating, and so the driveline itself was absorbing a ton of shock on downshifts with our new air shift setup. I'm betting that under really heavy braking, we managed to get this thing to jump timing. So, after focusing on the fuel mapping itself for our new turbo installation, we then swapped over to paying attention to other small details, especially that rev match programming. This was the longest stint this car has spent on the dyno. Andrew put in considerable time to make sure every other system of this car was set up properly so that this wouldn't happen again. It took a lot of work, but for once this car feels more sorted in a technical sense than ever before. Even down to small details like finally calibrating our fuel level gauge. Believe it or not, we've never done that prior. But now, after sorting the details and the tuning, the car is making technically more power than it's ever made on the small turbo setup. 550 wheel, and it should be ready for Road America. So as mentioned, we are fully sorted and race ready, assuming this thing stays together. The downside, though, is we've got a monumental road trip ahead of us. We've got to drive 2,200 miles or 3,500 kilometers each way to get this thing out to Road America in Wisconsin. We've only got 3.5 days to get there if we want to do any testing and tuning before the event itself. So, make sure you come back next week for the next episode that includes the trip and the drive itself.